The early hours of April 4th, 1979, greeted Sverdlovsk with its usual silence. The city was gradually waking up from its sleep. The local residents went about their usual daily routines, completely unaware that a silent but deadly threat was already looming ominously over their heads. Soon, ambulance dispatchers began to receive a growing number of reports about strange incidents on the southern outskirts. People were losing consciousness en masse, complaining of severe coughing and vomiting. Body temperatures were rapidly rising to 40 degrees, and the condition of the patients was quickly deteriorating. The medical staff still did not realize what they were dealing with. Only later did it become clear that the city was struck by one of the most terrifying epidemics.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your support helps the channel grow and motivates me to create even more amazing videos for you.
A sudden outbreak of anthrax. According to official data, the number of fatalities reached 64 people. However, some researchers point to different figures, no fewer than 100 deaths. Despite a prolonged information campaign supporting the version that contaminated meat was the source of the infection, many eyewitnesses and experts insisted otherwise. They were convinced that the cause of the disaster was the accidental release of anthrax spores into the atmosphere, which occurred as a result of an accident at a military laboratory located in military town number 19 in the Chkalovsky district of Sverdlovsk, and was part of a top-secret facility engaged in the development and production of biological weapons. Although this activity is prohibited by an international convention, which the Soviet Union officially joined only in 1972. Traces of infection can be found in numerous medical reports. One such case, a young man who, despite feeling unwell, set out in the morning to look for work. He became ill right on the tram. It was already too late to help. Another man who was sick was having tests done at the clinic, and right in the doctor's office, his condition rapidly deteriorated. He could not be saved. Yet another case. A married couple was getting ready to leave by car. The man went to the garage, but never came back. His wife found him dead by the open door. There was no chance left to help him. The sick were literally being picked up right on the streets. At first, they were taken to the 24th hospital, but the beds there quickly ran out. Then it was decided to redirect the flow of patients to the 20th hospital, which became the next stronghold in the fight for life. In the 20th hospital, where the sick were brought, there was an atmosphere of confusion and fear. One of the doctors recalled that at first patients were diagnosed with pneumonia, but it quickly became clear this was something much worse. Patients were dying even while on mechanical ventilation and despite strong doses of antibiotics. Medicine was powerless. The scenes in the wards were horrific. The living and the dead lay side by side. People were as afraid of the corpses as they were of fire. Relatives were refusing en masse to claim the bodies. The dead were carried out in exchange for a bottle of alcohol or a symbolic 5 rubles. This was the price for silence, for bravery, or for contempt for death. The medical staff working in the ward made a difficult decision not to return home. They set up sleeping places for themselves right in the hospital and began waiting for the first signs of infection in themselves. But the symptoms never appeared. And only on April 12th, after a closed meeting, the chief infectious disease specialist of the USSR, Vladimir Nikiforov, together with the chief state sanitary doctor, Peter Burgasov, announced the diagnosis was confirmed. It was indeed anthrax. However, the official cause of the tragedy was declared to be harmless, contaminated animal meat. Although official sources did not provide detailed explanations, some pathologists of that time began to doubt the proposed version of events, but did not dare to openly voice their objections. Among many medical professionals, the belief remained widespread that the infection had occurred through airborne transmission, not as a result of consuming contaminated products. Nevertheless, the version about infected meat remained the official explanation for a long time. It was only in May 1992 that the situation began to become clearer. At that time, Boris Yeltsin, in a conversation with journalists, mentioned that the official report during the anthrax outbreak initially stated that the infection was caused by an animal that supposedly brought in the disease. Later, it became known that the Soviet special services had, after all, acknowledged the real cause. It was related to military biological experiments. However, even then, the details were not disclosed. In 2006, the official version finally collapsed when Petro Burgasov publicly admitted its falsehood. He noted that with proper heat treatment, the anthrax pathogen is destroyed, and therefore the meat version did not hold up to scrutiny. According to him, at the time he was forced to assure Yeltsin that the infection had occurred through meat, although he himself had doubts. In the same interview, Burgasov confirmed that despite the ratification of the International Convention on the Prohibition of the Development of Bacteriological Weapons, the Soviet Union continued to develop them. This involved strains of anthrax, pneumonic plague, smallpox, and botulinum toxin. All of this, according to him, was allegedly developed for the purpose of creating effective vaccines. The reasoning was based on the idea that protection against a potential threat is impossible without thoroughly studying it, including through testing. The spread of anthrax likely had its epicenter in the military town of Sverdlovsk 19, where those same secret studies were being conducted. During the Soviet era, this area had the status of a classified facility. Nearby, at a distance of about 200 meters, there was another military town, Sverdlovsk 32, which housed a motorized rifle unit. In 2008, Andrei Mironyuk, former deputy head of the special department of the KGB for the Ural Military District, shared his memories of those events. At the beginning of April, he began receiving alarming reports about the deaths of several soldiers and reserve officers in Sverdlovsk 32. For about 2 weeks, specialists worked through various hypotheses, including those related to meat consumption, dietary habits, as well as the possible influence of raw materials used at industrial enterprises. To clarify the situation, Mironyuk turned to the leadership of the neighboring 19th military town, on whose territory a secret laboratory was located. He obtained a map of the wind directions that prevailed during those days and decided to verify this data by requesting similar information from Koltsovo Airport. The comparison revealed significant discrepancies in the data, which aroused even more suspicion. Operational teams were formed, which began to meticulously collect testimonies from the relatives of the deceased, recording the exact time and location of where the victims had been. On the map, they marked exactly where these individuals had been immediately before their deaths, and it turned out that around 7 or 8 in the morning, all of them had entered the area affected by the wind blowing from the direction of the 19th settlement. According to Mironyuk, the cause of the emergency was official negligence in the military laboratory. One of the employees, when starting work, failed to activate the protective systems. This led to a critical increase in pressure in the ventilation system, which most likely triggered the leak. As a result of the accident that occurred in the military laboratory, one of the filters could not withstand the load and burst. As a result, deadly anthrax spores escaped and spread across the surrounding area. It was in these areas that people later began to die. Among the victims were those who hurried to meetings, work, or school in the morning, were outside, or simply stepped out onto their balconies, completely unaware of what was happening. Experts still debate whether there was some kind of explosion or a failure in the safety system at that time. However, within a certain circle of people, there was a firm belief that the source of the outbreak was the military laboratory itself. Its management tried to conceal this fact, but eventually, when the evidence became overwhelming, they had to admit the obvious. Only after decisive pressure did those responsible admit to the true causes of the tragedy. After that, a large-scale disinformation campaign was launched, aimed at controlling public opinion both inside the country and abroad. Surveillance was organized over mail, communications, and print media. Counterintelligence officers were involved in the operation, particularly to influence foreign sources of information. There was also another version of the events. The former head of the environmental department of the Yekaterinburg city administration, Sergei Volkov, claimed that a cassette of munitions exploded in the transport tunnel beneath the laboratory of the 19th settlement. The mortality rate among the victims was lightning fast. As eyewitnesses from the emergency departments recalled, patients could remain conscious for some time, even move around, but then suddenly developed severe shortness of breath, which quickly led to death. From the moment of hospitalization to a fatal outcome usually took no more than 3 hours, and from the onset of symptoms, no more than a day. Because of the rapid progression of events, medical records appeared extremely brief and were almost immediately confiscated by representatives of the security services after being completed. Individuals in military uniforms were present in the hospitals. They controlled the situation, spoke with the staff, and monitored every detail. Medical records written in pencil, as well as doctor's notes, were also collected and taken away. In conversations with the press, medical staff mentioned that the KGB officers who controlled the situation in the hospital had a separate room allocated specifically for their use. But at the same time, the medical staff had no opportunity to focus on searching for the source of the contamination. All their attention was absorbed by the struggle to save the lives of patients who were rapidly dying. It was decided to centralize all infected patients in City Hospital number 40, where a 500-bed hospital was urgently set up based on the infectious diseases ward. One of the ward nurses recalled how this relentless shift began. The first patients were brought in at midnight. They were brought in by ambulances, taken to a separate entrance where there was a special freight elevator. All these measures were taken to avoid panic and minimize contact with other people. The condition of the patients was extremely severe. The predominant symptoms were signs of acute respiratory failure, severe coughing, and general weakness. Most of the infected were still young, between 30 and 40 years old. The medical staff had to work in conditions of complete absence of special protective equipment. They did not have plague suits or modern masks. For protection, they used 2 gowns, a surgical cap, and for the face, they put on a homemade mask, a scarf wrapped in gauze on both sides. Treatment was carried out with numerous injections and antibiotics, but the conditions were extremely difficult. The syringes were reusable. After each use, they had to be boiled, which required extra time and effort in an already overburdened hospital. The medical staff worked around the clock in those days. Doctors and nurses did not leave the hospital grounds. They slept right there and ate in a cafeteria that was specially set up on the 5th floor. Going home was impossible. A state of emergency was declared in the city. Alongside treating patients, a large-scale vaccination campaign and disinfection of the area were launched. In the southern districts of Sverdlovsk, the top layer of soil suspected of contamination was removed. Building surfaces, roads, and even trees were treated with special solutions. The streets were literally paved over with asphalt to isolate dangerous hotspots. However, despite these measures, a new wave of infections occurred. This was caused by the fact that many workers involved in the disinfection efforts did not even have basic protective equipment, including respirators. In the process, they inhaled remnants of the pathogen, which led to new cases of illness. The mortality rate only began to decline after an effective treatment regimen was found and the entire city was thoroughly disinfected. The last fatal case was recorded on June 12, 1979. But to this day, all official documents related to these events remain classified.